Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum and a very good morning, everyone from Malaysia. Of course, it's good evening in the United States of America and good afternoon in other parts of the world. Dear friends and colleagues, once again, thank you for joining us for today's program called the Third International Partner Lecture Series, organized by the Department of International Affairs, UITM Global. So, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, before we begin, allow me to welcome a very special guest in our program, in our third series, that is none other than the Chairman Board of UITM, Yang Berbahagia Professor Emeritus, Tan Sri Dr. Ibrahim Abu Shah. So, welcome Tan Sri to this program. Thank you very much for making time this morning. Now, Yang Berbahagia Tan Sri is not new to UITM, as everyone in UITM knows that Tan Sri was the former Vice Chancellor of University Technology Mara for 9 years from 2001 to 2009. He also served the Malaysian government as a senator in the parliament, Malaysia, for 2 terms after being the VC of UITM. And what made us proud for Ohio also, distinguished Ohio University alumni. And here he is, this year, 2021. We are glad to have Yang Berbahagia Tan Sri as the Chairman Board of UITM. So once again, welcome Tan Sri. Thank you for joining us in this program this morning. So distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, let us now begin our program, of course, with the welcoming remarks. But before that, I would like to take this opportunity to wish everyone a happy Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month. And if we do not know, now we know that May of every year is dedicated to Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month. So with that, we shall move along and let us now begin our program with the welcoming remarks by Professor T.S. Dr. Hajar Roziah Muhammad Jano, the Acting Vice Chancellor. So let us watch her welcoming remarks. Professor Dr. Roziah.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Our Honorable Speaker, Professor Dr. Renee A. Middleton, Dean Gladys W. and David H. Patton College of Education, Ohio University, United States of America. Yang Berbahagia Professor Chemist Dr. Hadariah Baharun, Assistant Vice Chancellor, Internationalization, UITM Global. Yang Berusaha Dr. Hajah Zainab Haji Muhammad Noor, Director, Department of International Affairs, DIA, UITM Global. Distinguished guests and my beloved students. Ladies and gentlemen, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and a very good morning, selamat pagi to all. I'm proud to be here today for the third International Partners Lecture Series in 2021, organized by the Department of International Affairs, DIA UITM. Today's lecture will be delivered by our distinguished speaker, Professor Dr. Middleton, the Dean of Ohio University Gladys W. and David H. Patton College of Education, USA. I'm happy to see many of you on the virtual platform, especially since we have had to prolong our new normal lifestyle due to the recent spike in COVID-19 cases in Malaysia. The current crisis is unparalleled in its scale in modern history. My advice is for us to heed the SOPs and the exhortations by the government to stay home and be safe. This event marks yet another positive step between UITM and our longest international partner, Ohio University. This strengthens our partnership in mutually beneficial academic pursuit. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, on this unique occasion, we have the pleasure of hosting Professor Dr. Renee Middleton, who will speak on the role of higher education leaders in diffusing the rising anti-Asian violence and hate. The topic is apt and timely, especially in the current atmosphere of violence, fear, and hate around the world. It is especially so in the US, with the rising hate against AAPIs, Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. We need to learn and understand that violence, fear, and hate cannot be tolerated. Let me take this opportunity to introduce our esteemed speaker. Dr. Middleton is a tenured professor of counselor education with 29 years of vast teaching experience. She has been integral in procuring and administering research and outreach grants that total over $1.4 million US dollar. Her research focuses on racial identity theory, its development, and its association to multicultural counseling competency. Dr. Middleton's research interests also includes disability policy issues, education and workforce diversity, and aging and disability. Prior to her deanship at OU, Dr. Middleton served as the Director of Research, Human Resource Development and Outreach for Auburn University's College of Education in Auburn, Alabama. She has contributed to several chapters, monographs, and co-authored 25 peer-reviewed articles. Ladies and gentlemen, for your information, OU's kinship with ITM then began in 1975 with joint program in Bachelor in Business Administration, in short BBA. As a result, the first Ohio ITM batch of 24 students graduated on the 12th August 1977. OU also established the Masters in Business Administration program initially with ITM, then with the Naga and the Sarawak government. Since then, various successful collaborative activities have been accomplished. When in 2009 and 2010, the Faculty of Communication and Media Studies sent 2 groups of students for internship program at OU. Not forgetting, Ohio film students traveled to Malaysia in December 2012 to January 2013 to produce a film under the direction of Frederick Lewis, Associate Professor in the School of Media Arts and Studies. The 23-minute film, Home for Hari Raya, was based on the short story of the same name written by Robert Raymer, an Ohio native and a long-time expat living in Sarawak. Other areas of partnership include International Conference in University Learning and Teaching in CULP, a biennial conference on teaching and learning in higher education hosted by the Faculty of Education UITM, with OU's faculty members delivering keynote and plenary speeches at the event. The most significant collaboration between UITM and OU is the jointly organized Distinguished Tun Abdul Razak Lecture, which was supported by the Ministry of Education. The event was held every 2 years since 2013, and last year was done in 2018, prior to the pandemic. However, the most prestigious acknowledgement is to be appointed a Tun Abdul Razak Chair holder at Ohio University, a task entrusted by the Malaysian government. The Tun Abdul Razak Chair in Malaysian and Southeast Asian Studies was established in 1981 with funding from the Malaysian government and Ohio University. The first chairholder was Yang Berbahagia Tan Sri Said Muhammad Nakib Al-Atas. We are proud to have Professor Dr. Habibah Ash'ari to be the 14th chairholder and the first from UITM, as well as the second female to hold the post from 2011 to 2014. Ladies and gentlemen, we have built strong educational partnerships with OU over the years. These partnerships culminated in several renewal of the Memorandum of Understanding, which stipulated that UITM and OU will continue to collaborate on academic and social networking until 2023 at least. And ladies and gentlemen, for your information, Dr. Middleton's lecture, which focuses on the role of higher education in diffusing anti-racist violence and hate, shows the relevance of the lecture to the current situation. UITM would like to welcome and thank you for your time in sharing your experience with us today. We certainly hope that this will lead UITM students and graduates in the direction of a better future through future and global thinking. Global education is the trend, and as a responsible institution of higher learning, UITM needs to prepare future graduates to meet new challenges in the 21st century and beyond. It is my belief that sustainable programs and impactful activities like this could further enhance UITM's presence in the global arena. With that, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I certainly hope that students and staff at UITM particularly would benefit and everyone will be engaged in the lecture given by Dr. Middleton. With that, thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor T.S. Dr. Rosajano, for the welcoming remarks. Ladies and gentlemen, we know that today's topic of discussion is very timely, as it is an issue that needs to be addressed for a better future wherever you are, whoever you are. In light of the recent incidences of anti-Asian violence and hate in the United States, we have brought with us Professor Dr. Renee Middleton, Dean of Gladys and Patton College of Ohio University. And Dean Middleton will be sharing on the role of higher education institutions in diffusing the rising anti-Asian violence and hate. So institutions of higher learning can definitely play a very important role in assuring that all the groups can live with each other harmoniously, as long as we are willing to open our hearts to embrace diversity among us. And of course, the more we embrace diversity, the more respect and tolerance we develop towards one another. So on that note, let us then welcome Professor Dr. Renee Middleton to take it from here on her lecture today on the role of higher education, all right, in diffusing the anti-Asian violence and hate. So Dean Middleton, the screen is all yours.
Thank you, Director, and many thanks to the Vice Chancellor for her comments and introductory remarks and reminding us of the challenges that we're all facing with the pandemic. The pandemic has been challenging for us all, but it's my privilege to be able to be invited. Thank you for the invitation. And I must say, good evening, good morning, and good afternoon to all of our participants. It's not often that one speaker gets to address audience in so many different time zones, but I think it speaks to the impact that UITM is having globally. So thank you, and we appreciate the invitation. Yes, let's begin moving forward with our slides. I will just get into our comments. And as has been said, the title of our time together, the topic is on the role of higher education in diffusing the rising anti-Asian violence and hate. Now, obviously, I'm in the US, so I carry that perspective, but I'm also going to try to put a global lens on what is happening. And there are lots of things that we can take, you know, when we're challenged with issues of let's say, obstacles that the pandemic has presented us, there are some things that we've learned that we can pull away from and use in a positive way. But there are also ways when people are fearful and people are challenged with the unknown, that people use defense mechanisms that often are harmful and not positive. And so we want to take a look at some of those harmful things like the violence and hate. But we don't want to end there. We want to talk about what our opportunities are and how higher ed, each of us, can play a role in turning a negative into a positive. The next slide, please. And so this is a quote that I often think of and that I carry with me. And it's a little bit of a paraphrase from Edmund Burke. And it is, as you read there, is all that is necessary for evil to rise is that good men and women sit and do nothing. We know that there are individuals who we might characterize as not having open hearts or being the opposite of good, evil, people who mean harm. But our greatest challenge is to get good people to act in ways that can push against the hate. And that's each of our calling and our challenge today. And so good men and good women who we're speaking with today, we are telling ourselves and reminding ourselves every day that our responsibility is not just to sit and do nothing, that our responsibility is to act and to change the world to make it better. Next slide, please. So when we talk about the AAPI community, I'm using the definition just to set a context of who is included from the U.S. Census Bureau and how it is defined in the U.S. And it does include persons having origins, as you see on the slide there, from the Far East, the Southeast Asia, the Indian subcontinent, including Cambodia, China, obviously Malaysia, many other countries that you see there. So when we talk about, the chancellor talked about and the director talked about the AAPI community, these are the individuals and the countries around the world that we would consider to be part of our AAPI community. And it is that group, when we talk about stopping Asian hate, that really we want to talk about some of that's occurring in the U.S. and globally and set a context for our discussions today. Thank you. Next slide. I think this, I want to say that this becomes an important topic, and it becomes an important topic for all of us, but in Malaysia as well. You travel abroad. I've had the pleasure of being in Malaysia myself in 2018 and visiting UITM. And likewise, it's been a reciprocal invitation where our resident chair and others from Malaysia have had the opportunity not just to travel to US, but global citizens. And when we travel abroad, people don't necessarily know where we come from. You have families who live in the US and other parts of the world who live abroad. You have coworkers. You have friends who live abroad. So this is not a topic that, as you have already expressed, is not something that you can't identify with or don't identify with. It is a topic that touches us all, as the chancellor said earlier in her remarks. You're part of the global community. We are all part of a global community. And UITM has the pleasure of preparing teachers, professionals, leaders in business, industry, various professional identities. And those individuals are not leaders simply in Malaysia, but often are being leaders who travel abroad, who work abroad. And so the challenges that we're experiencing with Asian hate is a global phenomenon that affects us all. None of us resides or lives in the cocoon of our own existence. And I would add that the AAPI community is a part of America's history. It is not a history in and of itself. It is a part of the global international history, but it is definitely a part of America's history. We have the first AAPI vice president in America, Dr. Kamala Harris, who is part of the AAPI community, who is part of the Black community. So our world does get smaller. As large as we are, we have so much in common. The Asian American community, a rise of anti-Asian violence in the US. The outpouring of grief and anger over the news that 6 Asian women were among those killed in the shootings in 3 Atlanta area massage parlors drew national attention to the rise of anti-Asian violence in the US. It shook us. It woke us up. It woke us up to something that didn't just start that day. We think about Asian hate and violence. It was something that was happening all along. But for some reason, that moment opened us up to what was happening. But it is true that since the pandemic, it has gotten worse. And this is the event that opened our eyes that it got worse and that we needed to do something about it. So I want to share an intro video to give you a sense as we move to our next slide, and we'll show the video that gives you a sense of just how this was being communicated in the US nationally.
We need to talk about anti-Asian hate.
A wave of violence against elderly Asian Americans.
Violent attacks against Asian Americans.
More than 2,800 reports since the pandemic began.
Man attacks the couple.
Elderly woman is chased by a bully.
Slapped her and lit her clothes on fire.
8 people are dead after shootings.
I never see him again.
Since the coronavirus pandemic began, thousands of Asians in the US have become targets of harassment. The Stop AAPI Hate Reporting Center found that bullying, assaults, and verbal abuse were becoming more normalized across the United States. Now, there are a lot of upsetting incidents that demonstrate this spike in targeted attacks, some of which you might have recently seen shared across social media. But what has always deeply bothered me about this issue is, why have so many of us not talked about this before? Not just online, but in our classrooms or with other marginalized groups or even at our own dinner tables. Why is it that when we need to talk about anti-Asian hate, it often feels like we're talking about it for the first time?
Despite having such a long history in this country, we are not the ones you think of when you think of Americans. And very often people don't take the time to even distinguish between who is Chinese, who is Korean, who is Japanese, and so on. And now we find ourselves in this really tragic and unpredictable situation, not just in America, but around the world with this virus.
And so our next slide makes the point that this is not just an American problem. The rise in hate crimes targeting Asian communities is global. The rise since the pandemic, with increased reports coming from Canada and a number of cases involving anti-Asian discrimination and xenophobia reported by the Human Rights Watch group globally in Italy, Russia, Brazil last summer, and New Zealand. Research by the New Zealand Human Rights Commission reveals that last month found that 54% of Chinese respondents had experienced discrimination since the start of the COVID-19 pandemic. 54% of those surveyed. It's not just Chinese. It's all members in the AAPI community, because people don't make a distinction. They don't see the difference. The next slide. From the UK to Australia, reports of anti-East and anti-Southeast Asian hate crimes have increased in Western countries as the pandemic took hold this past year. At least 11 people interviewed by CNN. They talked to several different individuals nationally, discussions, platforms, forums. 11% of people of East and Southeast Asian descent, the Cable News Network, International Network, spoke to individuals who described racist incidents, such as people moving away from them on trains and train rides, verbal abuse, and even physical assault. As the pandemic made its way across Europe, activists in Spain and France noticed a problem. Campaigns, such as the one on the screen, such as No Soy un Virus, I am not a virus. These campaigns were created to raise awareness of the uptick in violence against Asians. Next slide. In the UK, police data suggests a rise in the UK of 300% in hate crimes. As the slide shows, in the first quarter of 2020, compared to that same period in 2018 and 19, a 300% increase. Over the past year in the UK, Chinese Americans takeaway owners, Chinese takeaway owners, those who are in restaurants, etc., reported being spat at and attacked. Nurses of East and Southeast Asia heritage working in the National Health Services have reported incidents of racial abuse from patients, people they're taking care of, from patients. And people of ESEA descent have been victims of violent and racially aggravated street attacks. Next slide, please. There was a Pew Research study, a survey that was done in July of 2020, and they found that more anti-Asian and anti-Black sentiment has increased since the pandemic. For some reason, generally when we think about racism, we often think about racism as it relates to Black Americans or Africans of the diaspora. But why don't we think about Asian, the AAPI community? Part of what we need to do in higher education is begin to have conversations in our classrooms about our histories, our commonalities, the things that we share, the things that we have in common. And we've been silent for too long, I think. And so the Pew Research found that 6 in 10 Asian adults say it's more common for people to express racist or racially insensitive views about people who are Asian than it was before the virus outbreak, compared to 4 in 10 whites. 45% of Black adults also said it was more common to hear more racist comments about Blacks since the pandemic. Why does the pandemic bring this out? What is it about the pandemic? I don't think it's necessarily the pandemic in and of itself, but that was a time where people didn't know what to think. People were feeling vulnerable. People were losing jobs. And people don't know what to do, so they lash out. And we seem like we have to find somebody to blame. And the research is very clear that while Black adults were being blamed, no one was being blamed more than the AAPI community. Let's focus a little bit more in our next video. When we talk about the Asian and Black communities, we know that historically, Black Americans know what racism feels like, but I don't think we also always understand the connection that we have with each other in the civil rights history in the United States. So this video is going to talk about that connection that we have always historically had that people don't even know. I don't know that Black Americans always understand their own history, or that the AAPI understands their culture and their history in the context of the civil rights movement, in the context of our working together in supporting one another. And so this video helps share some of that history.
The United States, as we understand it, was built on the project of racialization, of separating, distinguishing, and valuing and devaluing people along lines of race and their proximity to or away from whiteness.
The struggle of Asians and African Americans are very different, and we're not trying to equate our experiences in any way. But we also need to remember that we've been linked in ways we don't often hear about.
You know, these violent attacks against Asian Americans, it's also, you know, I'm Black and Asian, so it's really disheartening and actually really traumatic to read stories like this. I just saw like a really huge need for these two communities to come together because we're not each other's enemies. When you understand the history of everything, you kind of start to understand how you can move forward. Back in the 60s and 70s, I think they truly understood how important education was, and I think that's why they set up a lot of mutual aid, a lot of community support that involved educating.
The civil rights movement was highly influential amongst Asian American leaders who drew inspiration from Black freedom fighters. Likewise, when Japanese Americans were sent to detention camps during World War II, Black civil rights leaders tried to repeal the Emergency Detention Act. Cross-cultural activism blossomed as Asian American students rallied alongside Black student organizers and other ethnic groups as part of the Third World Liberation Front in the late 60s. This culminated in student strikes that led to equal education opportunities and the creation of ethnic studies programs. In 1978, it was Black people who called for the US to accept Indo-Chinese refugees and even paid for a full-page advertisement in the New York Times. Similarly, when Vincent Chin was beaten to death, Black activists like Jesse Jackson were part of the movement to call for justice for his murder.
Those who live, we must redefine America so everybody knows everybody fits in the rainbow somewhere.
You know, there was a photo I just found of Jesse Jackson holding my great auntie Lily Chin, comforting her. I remember every day that it was racial solidarity coalitions that made Vincent Chin's name known all across the country, that created federal legislation around hate crimes that didn't exist for people like my cousin.
It's because of the Black community and the civil rights movement that Asians then adopted and we were beneficiaries of immigration, improved rates, and in terms of voting policies that were more amenable to us, in terms of interracial marriage that was now available to us. And that once again started from another community that was othered, that we were othered with.
Activists like Yuri Kochiyama and Grace Lee Boggs not only pulled insights from Black radical frameworks for Asian American liberation, but were also strong and active advocates for Black social justice movements. Yuri was so involved with Malcolm X's work that she was present at his assassination in 1965 and at the forefront of countless civil rights and social justice battles over the last 6 decades.
It is important for us to understand that one of the things that those who seek to dehumanize other individuals, who want to retain their influence over individuals, one of the strategies that they use to do it is to keep us apart, to keep us and pit us against each other. And in the 60s, in the civil rights movement, the Asian and Black community came together and supported one another. And I think we've got to be mindful to not allow, while we have differences in how we speak, differences in how we look, differences in how we talk, that there are so many similarities of the things that we want for each other, for our families, for our communities, for our children. We're all striving to build a better world. We're all striving to build a better community. And so to be certain not to allow divisiveness to keep us apart. Martin Luther King uses the term or the saying that injustice anywhere is injustice everywhere. And I say that injustice done to another human being, whoever that individual is, I need to look at it as an injustice to myself. That we all have a responsibility. So the pandemic has brought a lot of pain and suffering for many. And with it, conspiracy theories, scapegoating the Asian community for the COVID-19 pandemic. And so standing together when people make comments that are negative or spew misinformation or to spew hate, we've got to counter that. But we don't counter it with hate, right? But how can we do that if we don't talk about it? We don't have these discussions in our kitchen tables, around the table. In my own family, I work to try to have those discussions about Asian hate. I work to try to help my family understand. Recently, a bill was passed in the US to stop Asian hate. Post-pandemic. And my family said to me, well, when is somebody going to pass a bill for them to stop doing things to Black people? And sometimes that attitude can pit us against each other. We can't allow that to happen. And we can't be silent about what's happening to other people in other communities. That was the right thing to do. And yes, they should do the other, but we can't say they should not do the other because they haven't done this. So we've got to have conversations in our classrooms about Asian hate. We've got to talk about racism wherever it exists in our classrooms. We've got to have these discussions and these dialogues about critical race theory. We have to understand our histories and our common histories. Our own history, yes, but our common histories as well. So we've got to talk about it. Whether it's racism, whether it's sexism, whether it's homophobia, whether it's xenophobia, all of it comes from the same place. A need for power and control over another human being. The next slide, please. In May of 2020, next slide. Yes. In May of 2020, Secretary General, United Nations Secretary General, Antonio Guterres said, the pandemic continues to unleash a tsunami of hate and xenophobia, scapegoating, and scaremongering. Encourages us to act now to strengthen the immunity of our societies against the virus of hate. That's the bigger virus. We will get the pandemic under control. Thank goodness for those of us who've been vaccinated. I'm so glad I got the Pfizer vaccination. There's Moderna, there's many others. But each of us in ourselves, while we had to depend on scientists to develop vaccinations against COVID, the virus of hate is something each of us has the power to eliminate. We don't have to have a scientist design anything for us. We all are the antidote to hate. Each of us. And those of us who work in the classrooms have numerous ways of engaging in discussions in our classrooms about these topics. Nearly 1 year ago, communities worldwide, or 1 year later, I should say, 1 year later since the pandemic began, communities worldwide say the situation has not improved, with many communities reporting spikes in hate crimes. The next slide, please. This is a story that touches my heart because it tells us sometimes we're afraid to have these discussions because we think our students aren't ready for them. Amy's eye lets us know she's not atypical. She's the typical student. She said, I grew up in an area with a large Asian American population. I have never had the opportunity to discuss anti-Asian racism in the classroom. This is what I'm saying when we as educators, those of us in higher education, we're in classrooms day in and day out. And she says she lives in a large Asian community and she's never had the discussion in the classroom. That falls on us as educators. We have failed Amy. She says, I've never had that opportunity to learn about Asian American history or engage with educators who understand my experiences. After the shootings in Atlanta put a spotlight on anti-Asian hate crimes around the world, she said not a single one of my teachers mentioned it. Not a one of them mentioned it. Why not? What are we afraid of? Why aren't we talking about common human events and using them as learning opportunities in our classrooms? She said the silence was deafening. And it made me feel like there was no space for me to share my reactions and concerns. And while Amy is saying this as a part of her story, I am certain that there were other students in the classroom who were white, Black, Latinx, others who were probably wanting to be able to discuss the same issues. But we failed to do so as educators. Next slide, please. So what can we do? This next video talks about some of the things that we can do. And then I want to share from my own perspectives, my thoughts about things that we can do. So between the video and some of what I will share to close out my commentary about some of the things that we can do. That, as I said, we have the antidote to hate. Each of us.
What we're seeing with white supremacy is they're using fear as their tactic. And I think to counter fear as a tactic, we really have to use joy. We can't out-fear fear. We have to out-joy fear.
Ultimately, it is important to recognize that the ways in which we respond to these horrific anti-Asian attacks will not only reflect upon our own history, but also shape the future of the next generation of Asian America and other communities. Anti-Asian sentiments are nothing new, and racism will continue to rear its ugly head in the future. But we have an opportunity now, today, to recognize how institutional mythologies continue to drive apart marginalized groups who are more powerful when standing together than struggling apart. Now is the time to break the cycle.
One of the greatest tricks of racism is how isolated it makes us feel. So while there are clear differences in the nature of the racism we encounter, it's a shared struggle, and it's something that we all have to be invested in order to get to a better place.
As we've learned, part of the unique problems that Asian Americans have faced involve multiple factors. A history of being wrongfully associated with disease, the blaming of immigrant groups during economic scarcity, the pervasive and destructive model minority myth, and the fact that many constantly still have to defend that they belong. This expectation for us to remain silent and abide by the rules is another way in which we've been made to feel invisible. But no more. Great, outspoken change is happening right now.
Asians for! Black lives! Sounds of change echoing across America.
Asian Americans have found a new kinship with the Black American struggle for social justice.
Our Korean brothers and sisters, we would like you to know, history don't have to repeat itself.
You look at the people in the Black Lives Matter march, you'll see huge diversity in that crowd. That's our next generation, and they are of the same mind. That's where I get my hope from.
I feel like for older generations, the idea was very much like, oh, let's put our differences aside and work together. What I'm personally seeing with like younger activists is that we're saying more like, let's recognize the different experiences that we have in this country, but still work together.
We are the ones who have to reach across communities and aisles to ask others, how can we be supportive of you and your community, but also rectify the immediate ills that our community is facing?
It can't just be this one period of time that we care about, spreading awareness, amplifying our needs. It has to be on our minds all the time. We have to constantly be thinking about how we can support our communities, our enclaves, our elders.
So find out the grassroots groups who are doing the work day in and day out when cameras are not here to make sure that our people across race and across culture and across class have access to their basic human rights, like to housing, healthcare, jobs, food, especially during COVID. Those are the organizations that you should follow their lead.
If you want to learn more, I recommend a fantastic documentary series on PBS called Asian Americans. And if you can, please give to the AAPI Community Fund, where you can make a tax-deductible donation, 100% of which will go to local grassroots organizations across the country devoted to restorative justice. GoFundMe, Goldhouse, and CAPE have curated and vetted all of these fundraisers that provide victim support and neighborhood empowerment. You can give directly through YouTube's donate button right now. Join the conversation and share your experience on YouTube and across social media with the hashtag #TalkAsianHate. Let's create an outspoken dialogue that can no longer be ignored.
Our community is a community that is becoming. We need to allow that. We're now coming into our own. Every community has their own journey, their own pace, and this is ours now. I think right now America is going through a reckoning. The face of America is changing, and that's a threat to the powers that be. But I think with every change, there's turmoil, there's instability. This is just the process of change.
New possibilities that we have to allow ourselves to be changed by the solutions as we create them.
So, we just talked about anti-Asian hate. Did it feel like the first time you really listened to or spoke out about it? Good. Now do it again and again, louder, with different types of people and with the knowledge and hope that we don't have to be in this fight alone. We can find ways to protect ourselves while supporting other vulnerable communities. Because the cold, hard truth is that this country has built a system to keep so many of us down. The only thing that will change it is if we talk about it.
The only thing that will change it is if we talk about it. We are powerful standing together. I think the partnership between Ohio University and UITM makes us more powerful together. Just as individuals coming to work collectively makes us more powerful together. So what are some strategies that we as educators can utilize? We talk about the fact that we're the antidote. We can give our own selves the vaccination. There are things that we can do. He asked a question. Is this the first time we've had this discussion? You've had this discussion on anti-Asian hate? Let's not make it the last. So one of the things that we can do in the US is certainly to hire and promote Asian Americans into leadership positions. It makes a difference. Provide cultural training. This is something that can be done anywhere. Provide cultural training and resources to non-Asian American educators. UITM can be a conduit for developing cultural training and resources to other people, to other nations, to other countries. Asian American teachers, schools must hire counseling staff and teachers from Asian American communities. The young lady said she'd never even had a teacher who was Asian American. Come on. I know in my years, I can identify with that. As an African American, never having an African American teacher. Our world is a global community. We've got to begin to have our schools, our communities, our institutions look more like America. One of the things I'm proud of under President Biden, the Biden-Harris administration, is that that administration does look more like America. It is the most diverse administration in our nation's history. Many AAPI individuals in leadership positions, not just as vice president, many African Americans, men and women in leadership positions, many individuals of Native descent, Native Americans in leadership positions. Our institutions have to look more like our communities. And UITM can help by preparing the next generation of teachers and counselors and other professionals. You're preparing individuals not just to work in Malaysia, but many of your individuals are working abroad. Next slide, please. Strategies that we can use and engage in as educators. Value all people, regardless of their race, their ethnicity, or other group status, regardless of their gender. One of the things that you note in many of those AAPI hate crimes, the violence, many of them were women. The majority of them are women. They're not all women, but the majority of them are women. And so there is a gender issue. But we've got to have these discussions in our classroom about valuing all individuals, regardless. We've got to talk about it. We, in our classrooms, understand, number 5, understand the role of the Asian American, the AAPI community plays, that leaders played and continue to play in our civil rights movement. That was video number 2. There aren't a lot of people who really understand the role that the Asian American community played in the civil rights movement. They didn't just get on board with talking about issues of equality. They've always been there. We just haven't talked about it. We haven't told that story. And that's a story that you should be ensuring that individuals in your classrooms know, that they know that story. They know the story and the role that the AAPI community played in our civil rights movement. Work across communities. No community is safe unless all communities are safe. Last month, I did a talk for the March of Living, which is a group that focuses on anti-Semitism, hate against Jewish individuals. And I was at a conference a year ago, or before the pandemic, and I presented at a conference. It was in person because it was before the pandemic. And the individual said to me, "But why are you talking about this? Are you Jewish?" No, I'm not. Do I have to be Jewish to talk about anti-Semitism? Hate is hate. And I don't have to be Asian American to talk about why anti-Asian hate is wrong. So I shouldn't be the only one talking about this. You shouldn't be the only one. We should be talking about this together in the same way that Asian Americans during the Civil Rights Movement talked about the wrongs that were being executed against Black Americans. We have to work across communities. No community is safe unless all communities are safe. And so use your voice to talk about your own community, but other communities as well. When you see, that's the antidote, that's the vaccination. Your voice is the vaccine. Number 7, we must stand together against violence perpetuated against any member of our global community. The next slide, please. Number 8, counter fear with the tactic of joy, peace, and forgiveness. One of the things, if you notice in the video, the young lady said, we can't take on hate with hate. And so when my family says to me, well, why don't they pass legislation to address issues that are affecting Black Americans? But you can't hate another group because they did the right thing for this group. And we can't hate people who perpetuate hate. We can hate what they do, but we can't hate the individual. We should dislike the behavior, but we can't use hate to end hate. The only thing that ends hate is the opposite, is love. We have to bring joy into a situation. We have to bring peace. We have to bring forgiveness. That doesn't mean people should not be held accountable. So showing love does not mean, and forgiving doesn't mean people aren't accountable for what they do. Number 9, speak out and share your stories. What are your stories? Share those stories. Talk about it around the dinner table at your kitchen table. Talk about your stories in the classroom. Speak out. Share your stories. That first video, the intro said, okay, we have to talk. Meaning we haven't spoken enough about these issues. And if we don't talk about it, we can't change it. And being silent about it will not make it go away. Number 10, let's stand together rather than struggle apart. That was one of the statements in the third video. We are more powerful standing together. So let's stand together rather than struggle apart. We have a shared struggle, the Black and Asian community and other underrepresented communities. We have a shared struggle. So rather than struggle apart, let's stand together in support of one another. Number 11, battle bias. Battle bias. People have biases. We don't have to take on those biases. we can certainly push against them. And number 12, join a grassroots group that fights against bias and hate. So as I conclude my remarks, we'll end on that note. And the next slide should say thank you. And we are ready for any Q&A. Thank you all.
All right, thank you very much, Professor Dr. Ren, for the enlightening sharing of today's topic. There were a lot of messages, all right, that were actually shared, and a few of them that, so one of it that I would like to, that strike me as very immediate is, encouraging more and more conversations about history, things that we have in common rather than, things that we do not have in common. And you're also promoting that, baseline, all right, to stand together against violence and understanding history, tracing history. And so you're also promoting that, we are all the global community. So we need to strive to build a better world for a better community. And I think what was very powerful there, maybe many of us don't realize that at the end of the day, that, we have in our hands to eliminate the virus of hate. I mean, right there in our own hands, and, and it's free for that reason. So, and I like the way you put it. We all have the antidote to hate. So, and at the very end of your talk, you actually proposed a total of about 12 strategies that we can then play our role, right? So then, looking at diversity as a strength rather than our weaknesses. So with that, once again, a virtual clap to Dean Middleton for the very enlightening sharing. All right, thank you very much. We shall now go to the Q&A, and I'm sure there are already questions waiting in the pigeonhole. And Renee, you will be able to see the questions too as I read them to you.
Okay.
Okay, I hope you can see the question. So the question says, parents and the communities play a critical role in ensuring that this message gets across, especially to young generations. What are the best ways to educate them about anti-Asian violence and hate?
I don't think that we necessarily have to teach them about, I think we just need to be able to have conversations about what's happening in our global communities. And then depending on the age, how do you have these discussions? Because children learn at a very early age who's in and who's out, who's the in group, who's the out group. And so what we have to help our children understand, age appropriate ways, is that there should be no out groups, that we're all different, and we should have these conversations with them. Because if we're not engaging our children in how they should treat other individuals, they will get all the wrong messages. So this goes back to having the conversations, watching some of the films, teaching them first, in order to love other individuals, one has to love themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't love yourself if you don't understand your own self and your own histories. So start with teaching your children about themselves and their history and their value. And then move to teaching them about other people's histories and the role that Asian Americans have played in that history.
Okay, thank you.
But I do think we have, let me just say this. I do think we have to teach about love. We have to teach about love. We have to teach about respect. We have to teach these things. They don't happen naturally. We are naturally selfish human beings. Unselfishness has to be taught. Love has to be taught. These are things that don't come naturally. So that's how I would respond to that.
All right, great.
Having
Thank you very much.
conversations.
Yeah,
Thank you.
thank you very much for responding to that first question. All right, and the next question follows. So thank you, Dr. Middleton, for such an insightful session. I'm sure in our curriculum we can instill love in schools and colleges, but what encourage hate and violence in real life? How to eradicate that?
I think it comes from people feeling like they're going to lose something. It's a people's desire to control, to have power. And people don't want to share power. What we don't understand is that you get more power by giving. It goes against people's thinking. People don't really believe that if you give more, you get more. The global society is get. And so having examples of people in various leadership positions and giving those opportunities to show that you don't lose anything by hiring me in a role, or you don't lose anything by me being in this position, that there are advantages for all of us. And so we have to start, somebody once said to me that they came to a meeting and they said, if you want to, how many of us want to stop hate? If you want to stop hate, raise your hand. And everybody raised their hand. And there's only one way. There's one individual that you can control. And that's me. That's, so it starts with me. What are things that I'm doing in my own life that is dehumanizing to another individual, or that devalues another individual, or that's discriminatory in it? And so it starts with me. If we want to encourage, because, it's not always the most grossest violent acts. We can promote subtle forms of hate by who we promote, who we say is important and who is not. And so it has to start with not what others can do, but what can I do?
All right, thank you very much for answering that question, a very insightful answer. We'll move on to the third question. Now, do you think colonization happened 100 years ago contributed as a factor of racism issue today?
I think so. Colonization happened, it goes back to power and control. That there was a need for individuals to control and colonize. And it was not an appreciation of the various communities that existed. That we wanted everybody to be like, this European way. And we fail to see the beauty of the diaspora, of the various flowers in the garden. And so, yes, I do think colonization, played a key factor. And it's still with us today.
True, very true. Okay, we're moving right along with the next question then.
Yes.
In the end, what matters most is that all of us are human beings living on the same earth. In your opinion, what really makes people think that one race is superior than others?
I think it comes from people's insecurity, honestly. I think anyone's desire to make themselves superior comes from their own insecurity. You're looking at an insecure person. Because if I'm secure, I don't need to put myself above you. I don't need to dehumanize you. And so, trying to understand the individuals, what makes them so insecure that they have to do that? What are they fearful of? And so what really makes people think that one race is superior than others, it's if I'm trying to control you, I make you think that you're less than, that you're not as smart as I am. You're not as good as I am. You don't look as good as I do. And it really is a result of my own insecurities. And I don't want you to know just how beautiful you are or how smart you are. Because if you really get to know how smart you are, how beautiful you are, that's going to threaten me. I might not be able to compete with you. And so we fall prey to that. We have hundreds of little boys and girls growing up ashamed of their skin color. Because people have told them it wasn't beautiful. While those same people telling them that their skin color is not beautiful is out in the sun baking so they can look like them.
That's how you put it. Okay. All right. Thank you. That's nice. All right. Yeah. So we move on to more questions here.
Yes.
Right. Okay. Do you think racism can be curbed, or is it just an act that has been a norm where we cannot change it?
I think it can be. I think we can make a difference. I've seen differences from my exchanges with individuals. Once you get to know people and you build relationships and you get to see past the outside shell, it makes a difference. And it's why I try not just to understand my own self and my own people, but I try to get to befriend other individuals who are different than myself. Because I feel like I'm being a picture book and a story for them to help reduce their biases. At the same time, I'm able to learn from them. So we start one individual at a time. We've got to build relationships. So we should be exposing our children to other people, other cultures. This is, all of it's relative. We're just talking about Asian communities right now, but even with individuals with disabilities, no matter the difference, we should expose ourselves to individuals who are different from ourselves and our children, and it makes a difference. So yes, I think we can, one person at a time. At least we should do this. When I lay my head on my pillow at night, I want to know I did everything I could that day to try to be good to every human being that I met.
Yeah, nicely said, Renee. Yeah. All right, thank you. We'll move on to another question then. So what are the main activities, do you think, from the international communities to eradicate or reduce the activity of racism or hate to Asian or Black people, especially in Western societies?
Well, I think you have to come from all fronts. I think we all play a role, no matter what we are. So I think laws and legislation makes a difference. I think we do need laws. I think we do need legislation to protect underrepresented groups. I do think that journalism makes a difference. I think you have to get out and you have to tell those stories and you have to shine a light on it so people can't hide and pretend it doesn't exist. I think in our classrooms, we've got to teach, we've got to educate, we've got to talk about it. I think music can play a role. I think there's just so many different avenues that we have and so many different tools in our toolkit. I think music and just some of the words that bring people together, that draw people in, the messages in music and song and poetry. There was a poet, Amanda Gorman, when the 46th president was sworn into office. That poem, I wish you would go back and you could go back and read it. Her name is Amanda Gorman, Gorman. She was the poet laureate at President Biden's inauguration. Read her poem. That poetry, those words, those meanings brings people together. So use
Yeah.
what's in your toolkit.
All right. Yeah, I recall that poem. Yeah, by Amanda Gorman. Yeah,
Yes.
that's a very
It's a beautiful.
powerful, and I think that
Yes.
right, beautiful, and it gives a sign of hope for the future in America, especially coming from the young generation there.
Yes. You have young poets in your own, in Malaysia. I just think there's that words matter, and the tools that we use to eradicate. There's so many different tools, and all of it's important. All of it's relevant.
Yeah. And I see that in the chat group. I think JY has shared that poem, the link to the poem.
Very good.
Thank you very much, JY. Now, we move on to this question then, Renee. Is there still any racial issue or discrimination happening nowadays organizations? If any, what can organizations do in order to combat the situation?
Yeah, there are different types of, let's say, race. There are systems that we put in place that I think are discriminatory. So yes, when we talk about there's organizational, there's structural racism, there's organizational racism, structures that make it impossible for women to move up the ladder. We've got to open our minds about what does a president look like. In America, we've never had a female president. Why? There are so many other countries who have female heads of state. So we've got to open our minds about what does leadership look like? What does a teacher look like? What does a doctor look like? Whatever. And not put barriers in front of anybody and say, well, that's not for you. You can't do that. It's never done. We've never had a Malaysian in that position before. That can't happen. We've never had a woman in that position before. That can, or whatever it is. So yes, there is systems in place that hold people at certain levels. And we've got to break down those systems. So yes, there is such a thing as systematic racism and structural racism, structures and organizational racism.
Yeah, thank you. All right, I think we move along. Does racism or discrimination towards other races contribute to the barriers in intercultural communication?
Oh, yes, I think so. When we think about intercultural communication, how we, whose voice we add relevance and importance to. Am I not going to listen to you because I don't deem your voice important enough or relevant enough? One of the things that I really like about UITM is that your leadership in women and men, gender balance, that's a good thing. I think that sends a positive message to young girls that they can achieve and they can be in leadership roles. Here in the U.S., I'll say here in the U.S., when we think about intercultural communication, we sometimes use terms that cause misunderstanding between the cultures. And so that's why if we come at each other with understanding that we all have the best of intentions, we can continue to engage and converse and understand what we mean when we use certain terminology, and not use those terminologies to divide, but understand one another and what those contexts and what those words and verbalizations mean. But yes, it can produce barriers, but we have to continue to work towards that and move past those barriers.
All right, so those barriers have to, probably we can reduce the gap and, ultimately get it to zero barriers then.
Exactly.
Ultimately. All right, moving right along. Okay, I think there are a lot of questions here today from our audience. Good. The culture of hate and division has existed for millennia. The important conversations have begun, and it's imperative that in educating the 21st century students, we address this issue in the curriculum.
Yes, definitely. Yes. We've got to address the issue in the curriculum. That's what the whole emphasis in today's discussion is we've got to begin to have these conversations, and we have to have these conversations in the classroom. It has to be integrated in our curriculum. We have to globalize our curriculum because our students are becoming global citizens. So our students can't just study about what's happening in America. They have to become global citizens and understand the connectedness. And the same with your students. We've got to globalize our curriculum. We've got to continue to have these discussions. And yes, we've been having them for generations, but we can't stop. We can't give up. Right? And we're having conversations now that we've never had before. So we're making progress.
Yeah, and the conversations have begun, like Deep was saying here. Yeah.
Just this conversation about Asian hate. When have we really talked about this and focused on this nationally? We've not really done that. So it is progress that we are having these conversations now.
Great. So it's only the beginning then?
Yes. Yes.
All right.
And it's the end.
So a question from Masria Mustafa here. All right. What concrete and practical steps have been taken by the current leaders in the United States to fix this issue, especially the Biden and Harris administration?
Well, I mentioned one of them. One of the concrete steps has been the Biden-Harris administration is modeling what a leader looks like. If you look at the leadership in the Biden administration, from his cabinet, all throughout, there are individuals in the AAPI community. There are individuals who are from the African American or African diaspora. There are Latinx leadership, LGBTQ community, individuals with disability. That's one way of modeling. That's a practical step. That's concrete to practice what you preach. They're also promoting legislation, as I said, the legislation that just passed.
Yeah.
Both houses, both chambers, right?
Yeah.
Talking about it, having leaders at the podium talking about these issues. We have a president. The previous president never talked about these issues from a positive standpoint, never once. It was all in terms of a very dehumanizing, degrading way. This president talks about the importance of communities, the importance of the AAPI community, the importance of other communities.
Okay, thank you, Renee. I guess we have a few more questions. Is that all right with you?
Yes.
Okay. Now, are there any professors in the United States of America who have been promoted due to their active participation in racism?
Now, I can't answer that. I don't know. I'm certain there are, right? But I think this is where presidential leadership comes from, that each university has to have a set of core values of who they are, what they are, and what kind of institution they will be. And yes, while there's freedom of speech, there's also, there should be no doubt about what the institution stands for. And at Ohio University, we say diversity is a core value. We talk about it. And when incidents happen, we make statements about it. We don't just sweep it under the rug. Now, sometimes I think we act slower than we should, but I can say that Ohio University does respond and act. I'm not aware of individuals who have been promoted, but at the same time, I wouldn't be surprised if they have been.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
We all, let me just say this. We are all guilty at one time or another of acting in racist ways.
That's true.
That's why I'm saying we have to take responsibility for ourselves.
All right.
Yes.
Okay. Now, next question is asking, I'm curious on your opinion. What do you think of people that use their race card to go against other races? Is it racism or is it okay to do that?
I don't think it's okay to do that. I'm not sure what when you say, we'll use the race card. I think there are some things that are obvious. And when something is obviously racist, you should put a name to it.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You should call it out. There are appropriate ways to call it out. You've got to figure out the appropriate ways to do that. But if I see that the sky is blue, me not saying that the sky is, blue, I'm stating the obvious. So sometimes you just have to state the obvious. But no, because one talks about race or speaks about it doesn't mean that they're using the race card. At the same time, to use it inappropriately and use it as an excuse, I'll just give you an example. I hired in our college one of the first African American females in our Department of Teacher Education.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that I said to her was, there are expectations regarding your work productivity for you to achieve promotion and tenure. Don't make me have to make a difficult choice. Because if you've not achieved those goals, you will not, as dean, I will not support your promotion and tenure.
Mm-hmm.
So do the work. Because nothing's going to make me prouder than to support your work. And her mother was sitting there because I was, when I was saying to her, she reminds me, I had forgotten I said this actually, but she reminds me. You remember when I invited my mother her mother lived in New York, so her mother came to visit her in Athens and she invited me over for dinner. And I said to her, you're a very bright scholar. You have the ability to become a full professor, but make no mistake, if you have not established a sound record to be promoted and tenured, I will not support you.
Mm-hmm.
So don't make me have to make that, don't put me in a position I have to make that difficult decision. So I say that to say, you can't use your race as a reason why you've not achieved. At the same time, there are many examples of individuals who have met and exceeded that bar aspects and been denied on the basis of their gender, their race, or their sexual orientation. And that's a fact. So when that happens, you have to call that out. And that is not using the race card or the gender card.
That's right. Yeah. Thank you. I think that's an excellent answer there for those who were asking those questions. All right, moving right along. Now, some racism or discrimination issues in the world did not receive as much attention. Could the biased opinions of certain mainstream media be one of the factors?
I think it could be one of the factors, but go back to what I said earlier, that we've got to make sure that no matter what field it is, that there are individuals. One of the reasons why we started telling these stories because you had more journalism changed. Journalism has more AAP members of the AAP community. Black stories weren't told until we got more Black journalists.
Mm-hmm.
The AAPI story wasn't told until there were more AP who are. So you've got to have these individuals in these roles to tell these stories. Because it's not that the white perspective is a wrong perspective. It's just a very narrow perspective through their window. But when you open up that window to include others, you enlarge your vision about what's actually happening. Those stories can be told. So when newspapers or media outlets, radio, TV, journalism, print, when they don't hire and they don't have a diverse staff, that's problematic because those stories aren't going to get told. And when they do get told, it's going to be told in a negative light.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Thank you. We'll move on to the next question then. I think we have a couple more. Yeah, hello, Dr. Middleton. Hate crimes are on the rise in the US. In your opinion, why are hate crime charges so rare?
Yeah, that's a difficult one, right? I think, you know, particularly as you think about, you know, I don't know if you keep up with the news that with African American men and a lot of the, you know, Asian, the AAPI hate. I think more and more you are seeing these crimes, these charges being made. Again, having people in the courts who look like us, having people who have to make these decisions, be inclusive of these communities matters. And so I think that we'll begin to see more and more of these hate crimes charged. The Biden administration has made a promise that these hate crimes will be studied, will be investigated, charges will be brought, and that makes a difference. We have a Justice Department, and the Justice Department has hired two individuals, one a member of the AAPI community, Benita Gupta, and an African-American female, Cynthia McKinney. And these individuals are ensuring, because under the previous administration, that whole office was gutted. The Biden administration now has hired individuals at the top level, and it is their responsibility to, because the legislation is there about hate crimes. We don't need any more. The legislation is there. It's just now knowing that the charges will be brought and that they'll be executed and go through the courts in the appropriate way. So I think we'll see more and more of that happening now under this administration.
Okay, right. Okay, moving right along, I think a couple more, and we're getting there. Okay, so how can internationalization of higher education help diffuse the racial hate amongst the communities?
Yeah, I think that's important. I just think just the discussions that we're able to have here today, I mean, it's a beginning, right? Yeah. Of us understanding, us talking, us sharing stories, us learning from one another. I think that helps diffuse. Lots of times hate comes from misunderstanding one another. And you misunderstand people who you don't know, who you don't have relationships with, who you have no connection with. And so I think these conversations and these communications and, like we say, globalizing or internationalizing our curriculum makes a real difference. Traveling abroad makes a difference. Bringing yourself into community where you are the other and understanding and seeing how that feels, I think matters. Opening up your horizon and your understanding, your knowledge that where you sit is not the center of the world. It is a very tiny part of the world. And so I think that matters. I think both curriculum and having experiences abroad makes a big difference.
Right, thank you. Okay, next question then. All right. So are there any publicly funded universities in the US which prohibit the enrollment of Asian students?
Not that I'm aware. Yeah, I'm not aware of any.
All right. Yeah. Okay, I think we're approaching the final question here from our pigeonhole. All right, so by Shari again, how will you address anti-Asian racism among the Asians themselves? Now, I think this is a very interesting question here.
Yeah, my mother says to me, you have a very diverse neighborhood. And so, and I do where I live. And right down the street from me, I have neighbors who are Asian. And in fact, they've invited us over for dinner in a couple of weeks. I think it's important to have the conversations. And he had in his yard a sign that said, "Stop Asian Hate." There's a yellow and black sign. And I sent him a text message. And I said, "Sweeling," I said, "where did you get that sign? I would like to put one in my yard." He said, "Oh, don't worry, Renee. I will get one for you. And when it comes in, I will let you know. And I'll put it on your doorstep." So now I have the sign in my yard. I think building friendships and having conversations and talking with one another. We just did a whole series in the college. It was a Munch and Learn series on immigration, immigration in the global world. Those conversations, those topics, and one focused on research on immigrants and international populations. One focused on student support, providing student support. One focused on what families. So us just, our team can have these conversations, establish this form, much like you're doing now. That's how we have the conversations. We can have the conversations one-on-one with family, neighbors, as I do. You can have the conversations at your institution, and you can create a global dialogue by doing forums just like this. So I just think we've got to talk about it.
Yeah.
And
Great,
when you're friends and you establish friendships, you can have these uncomfortable conversations. I send him videos, and he sends me things back to help me learn and understand. So it's a friendship.
Yeah, very true. Yeah, thank you very much. And I think we have a last question there. I think we have addressed this question, right?
Some racism and discrimination in the world did not receive it. Yeah, we said that. We answered that.
Yeah, we answered this one. Yeah.
Yes.
So, okay, great. I think those questions that were posed in the pigeonhole, I think they were very important questions that the audience had been wanting to ask. And I'm glad that Renee or Dean Middleton, you have actually done justice to all those questions. Thank you very much for your willingness to answer to those questions. And I'm sure it's getting late in the US, right? In the evening.
It is.
What time is it there?
10:41 p.m.
Okay, all right. So here is 10:41 a.m. then. All right.
It's 10:41 a.m. there.
That's right. Yes. Yes. Okay. So we've come to our final slot today, our session, where we have with us the Assistant Vice Chancellor for Internationalization at UiTM Global, Professor Chemistry, Dr. Hadaria Baharun, who is here to deliver her concluding remarks on the whole event today. So, Professor Hada, the screen is all yours, Prof. Hada.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much, Dr. Z and Prof. Renee Middleton. I'm inspired. I'm very inspired. Thank you so much. So allow me, please, to share my screen. Yeah. Can you see that?
Yes, we can. Yes.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Prof. Renee Middleton, the Dean of Patton College of Education, Ohio University, for the inspiring and highly arousing talk, The Role of Higher Education Leaders in Diffusing the Rising of Anti-Asian Violence and Hate. So I'm here to give a little bit of a concluding and appreciation remarks. So in year 2020 and certainly 2021 are marked and remembered as very challenging, volatile years. Since December 2019, the coronavirus has been affecting 218 countries and territories, territories around the world. It has indeed been a tough year for many, but as academics and researchers, it is called upon us to be very creative and innovative, adapting to new norms. The COVID-19 pandemic has dramatically changed the world and left countless people longing for our pre-pandemic ways of life. In the past few months, everybody has been hoping to return to our normal daily activities like before. While we may not yet have normality, we can show our resilience to adopt and adapt to our new norms. The current crisis is unparalleled in its scale in the modern history. However, we have to remain constructive and forge ahead for a better and stronger 2021. I believe that it is appropriate for us to continue collaboratively developing and carrying out programs and impactful activities to further enhance UITM's presence in the global arena. And I'm very happy to see many of you this morning on this virtual platform, well, evening in the US, especially now that we have to continue with stricter new normals due to the spike in COVID-19 cases in Malaysia. Congratulations and thank you to every single audience for choosing to be here this morning. Let's fight this together. This is our third International Partner Lecture Series of 2021, and on this auspicious occasion, we had the pleasure of hosting Prof. Dr. Renee Middleton, who spoke on the role of higher education leaders in diffusing the rising anti-Asian violence and hate. Thank you, Dean Middleton, for your time, passion, and willingness to share your thoughts and experience with us today. I certainly think that our audience today, from inside and outside of UITM and outside of Malaysia, have benefited tremendously and highly inspired by Prof. Middleton's lecture. We will be the advocates to ensure that more people will hear more and talk more about anti-Asian violence and hate, one individual at a time. This is in line with what we have been listening about hadith from the authority of Abu Sa'id al-Khudri. He says that I heard the messenger of Allah says, whosoever of you sees an evil, let him change it with his hand. And if he is not able to do so, then let him change it with his tongue. And if he is not able to do so, then with his heart. And that is the weakest of faith. This has been the teaching of Islam also. Whenever we see something not right, change it in whatever capacity that you are able to do. So UITM Global, through the Department of International Affairs, has invited Prof. Middleton to present this lecture to strengthen the relationship between UITM and the Ohio University so that more collaborative activities can be done together, continuing on this long-standing mutually beneficial relationship. Thank you again, Prof. Renee Middleton, our most engaging and eloquent speaker of today. Thank you, Tan Sri Ibrahim Abu Shah, the chairman of UITM Board of Directors. Thank you, Prof. Habibah Ashari, who is our honorary professor and a previous holder of the Tun Razak Chair in Ohio University. Thank you, Dr. Ji Yang Zhang, Interim Executive Director of Global Affairs, Office of Global Affairs and International Studies, Ohio University. You have all been extremely sporting this morning and very, very effective. At the maximum, today, the record was 140 participants in the IPLS 3 2021 who came from obviously Malaysia, Indonesia, and the USA. So thank you very much. And last slide, please allow me to warmly applaud the organizer of this milestone event, especially Dr. Zainab Muhammad Noor and the ICTD team led by Dr. Idayah Husna. We have Ms. Asmahan, we have Dr. Linda, for bravely and enthusiastically taking on the challenge of carrying out this electronic lecture series. The talk and discussion were very, very rousing and very, very interesting. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Kemis Hadaria, for the concluding remarks. So there we have it. So once again, on behalf of the organizers. So we are once again very delighted and very thankful to Professor Renee Middleton. So one more time, a final virtual clap to you, Professor Renee Middleton. Great. We look forward to future undertakings and future events with our partner in Ohio. All right. So as a token of our appreciation, so I think we're ready. We're asking our participants to come out and turn on their videos as we are going to take a group photo. All right. Is that okay with everyone? So,
yes.
All right. So to all participants then, can you please turn on your videos? All right. Dr. Usna will cue us and we'll get everybody here.
All right, we'll just wait for a few more seconds till we get everyone to be here. Okay, for the keep smiling. Smile. 1, 2, 3, smile. Keep smiling. We have quite a few pages here. You freestyle. Freestyle. All right, one more. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Usna, for the photo session. And one more thing I forgot to mention that we would like to also thank the Ohio alumni in Malaysia that have attended our session. So thank you very much for your support. Right, and we're told that about 200 total of OU alumni, but many of them have actually supported the OU and whatnot. And of course,
Oh, there you go. I see him, Dr. Mustafa.
Yeah,
very good.
Sports Center, the director of the Sports Center, Cik Mus. Thank you very much for joining us. All right, so once again, I think we shall say goodbye.
See you again.
Very good.
Yeah.
Good, everybody.
Very okay. Thank you once again, alumni of
Good
Ohio.
morning, good afternoon, and good night.
See you again.
Good night.
Have a good night.
Have a good rest.
Bye-bye. Thank you. Take
Thank you
care.
once again. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam.
Waalaikumsalam.